Championship season has started in Japan. For the next 7 weeks, there's going to be a championship somewhere in Japan, ending in Tokyo, where there are going to be two days in a row. In this video, I'll be going over how the meta is evolving in Japan, some questions that people may have, why a deck didn't make top cut, why certain decks did, how they did in the tournament in general, reviewing the lists that they used, how the meta is evolving, and we're going to use it as a baseline to see how it evolves from now. If you are curious about how the Japanese meta is evolving, make sure to subscribe, and let's get into the video. On October 27th, there was the Miyagi Championship, with over 1,000 people attending in a 1v1 tournament. In my videos, I generally cover a lot of 3v3 tournaments because that's a very popular format in unofficial tournaments, but as we are in the official 1v1 tournament format, we're going to see a very pure representation of what people are going to be bringing. You may expect that in a 1v1 tournament that the share of decks in the top cut is going to be a bit more lopsided towards the best deck, but let's just look at the top cut then. In Japan, the top cut's always going to be 16 people in a best-of-1 format. These 16 people are the 16 top players out of over 1,000 people after they have fought for 9 rounds. We can immediately notice that there's actually a very wide spread of decks in the meta. Interestingly, we have one of every Yonko in, of course, Teach, Luffy, Shanks, and Buggy. And I guess the most surprising one here is Buggy. And for this video, I have found at least one list for every single leader that was represented in this top cut. OP Hirata is a great resource on Twitter as he helps aggregate lots of data online. He helps to find things such as what decks are winning in smaller scale flagship tournaments, all the way to finding all of the matchups for the people who are in top cut, because these things aren't officially out. He does so much work for the community, and if you are curious about just the stats and not exactly the deck lists in OP09, make sure to check out his Twitter. This is one of the graphs from him. He found all of the matchups in Top Cut, and we can see, first of all, that Lucci ended up winning. Although people who are in the West may think, oh, of course Lucci wins, I guess the meta never changes. It's actually very surprising that Lucci won. Lucci was not really a contender to win the championship. The top decks that people were considering as contenders to win the tournament were either Blue Doflamingo, of course, or Black Luffy. So seeing neither of these decks in the top 2 is really interesting. We can actually see in the top 16 match that 4 of the Doflamingos disappeared, and the only one that survived was one that won the mirror, and both of the Black Luffys disappeared. As such, the top 8 became a very interesting mix of many decks. Now, before we go into the deck list that people use, I want to go over 2 points that people may be concerned about. Where is Purple Luffy, and where is Bonney? These are the 2 main decks that are considered to be meta that have not reached top 16. Picture OP09 as a rotating door, where the central axis is Blue Doflamingo. Blue Doflamingo is always going to be the strongest deck in this format, but all of the decks around it can and do cycle out. As Bonney becomes stronger, decks like Lucci become stronger. And as Lucci becomes stronger, decks like Black Luffy or Teach become stronger. As such, if the deck that you are wanting to play in OP09 is not represented here, that doesn't make it bad, it just makes it not necessarily great for the current meta. If this starts to adjust a bit, then we can see Bonney or Purple Luffy coming back up. But for this specific tournament, Black was in a very good spot in the cycle. In order to reach top cut in this tournament, you needed to go 8-1. No 7-2 player was able to reach top cut. But there was a Bonney player that went 7-2, so I just want to talk about his list because it is quite interesting, and he did in fact do very well in the tournament. He is running the 8-cost Roshinante, which people who have tried to deal with Lucci before are very familiar with, but he's also running the 5-cost Luffy. Now this 5-cost Luffy prevents things that are a cost 3 or less from being KO'd, and this is actually quite interesting because it doesn't say anything about the base cost being 3 or less, meaning that if the opponent reduces your characters to below 3 and tries to KO it, it is now within the range of being able to be protected by Luffy. As such, being able to play something like 8-cost Roshinante into the 5-cost Luffy makes it very difficult for someone like Lucci to be able to clear the board. Understanding the meta that he was going into, knowing that Bonney has a bad Lucci matchup, he still brought Bonney and made an adaptation for the Lucci matchup. As such, if you are interested in playing Bonney but you're afraid of the Lucci matchup, perhaps trying something like this can be very good. The rest of the package that he's running is fairly simple. The 5-cost carrot I've heard is very good for the Teach matchup, as on Tendong you don't really want to be playing one 10-cost because it'll be locked by 10-cost Teach. You want to be playing 2 5-costs. Carrot allows you to play these 2 5-costs and also get a Dong back for your leader ability. Not only this, but it's also an 8-cost Roshinante target, so again, more ways to spread out the board. So definitely a deck that is trying to find a way to deal with the Teach matchup and the Lucci matchup. He was rewarded by going 7-2, and although he barely missed out on top cut, very interesting deck that I wanted to showcase. Now, on the topic of Purple Luffy. Purple Luffy is actually a very weird deck because he is extremely consistent and very strong at what he does. It's just that some decks are quite good at answering him. Not only this, but he really wants to go first in a lot of matchups. And if it doesn't get first, or in the case of Shanks, if it goes first and not second, then it tends to have a lot less power. I think the unique issue that this deck has is that it's very similar to Doflamingo, where on a good day where it can properly get first in most matchups and draw all the cards that he needs, then he will consistently beat a lot of the meta. The only issue is that Doflamingo also does this. As such, generally people who want this sort of stable deck will play Doflamingo rather than Purple Luffy. Doflamingo is very strong when going first and second, and as Purple Luffy's true power only comes out when he's going first in a lot of matchups, there is this asterisk when using Purple Luffy that many people are afraid of. Nonetheless, though, there was another tournament on the same day, which was the Junior Friendly Cup. The Junior Friendly Cup is a elementary schooler or less tournament, and in this tournament, Purple Luffy won. The list is honestly kind of all over the place in running many 2-ofs and 3-ofs, but there are some very interesting cards in here that I want to showcase. Now, firstly, 9 Mom. I was talking about 9 Mom in the list and how I thought it felt a lot better than 9 Cost Luffy, and he is running the 9 Cost Mom. Also, he runs 9 Cost Luffy. But one other card that I want to talk about is the 4 Cost Law. 4 Cost Law is very interesting because, I mean, it's always been very strong, but it's also searchable off of the 1 Cost Law, as Law, although people often forget, searches Straw Hats and Heart Pirates. As such, in some matchups where the opponent fills up their hand massively, such as Doflamingo, for example, just being able to rip 2 cards out of their hand can be quite nice. As such, very interesting text that he is running. Just running 7/7 cost and 5/9 cost, just make sure that he will for sure draw something. This deck is absolutely maximizing the consistency of his strong move, and he was rewarded with winning. Now, of course, although these are elementary schoolers, and obviously there will be elementary schoolers that are a lot worse at the game, the top elementary schoolers are honestly very good at the game. Like, I've fought some in local tournaments and even some unofficial tournaments before, and they're quite scary. They do not show any emotion. They will play their cards and they'll play them correctly. Taking one step back from the official championship, I do want to look at some of the lists from an unofficial tournament that happened recently. Hachi CS is a very prestigious tournament because all the top players want to fight in this tournament. The prizing is very good in this tournament, which means that many of the top players will come together to try to win in this tournament, and there is a certain level of respect if you can win these tournaments, as they are just as hard, maybe even harder because of how strong the preliminary rounds will be, than actual championships. There aren't too many Hachi championships, but when they do happen, I will be going over them if there's something interesting, and I do want to talk about the Purple Luffy in this, because it was a 3v3 tournament, but both of the top teams had Black Yellow Luffy, Blue Doflamingo, and Purple Luffy. Not only this, but if we look at the Purple Luffy list from the winning deck list, you can see that he doesn't run the 9 cost Luffy and instead runs the 9 cost Mom. And the second place list actually runs 4 9 cost Mom and also the 4 cost Law that the Junior Friendly Cup player was also running. Although we haven't seen too much Purple Luffy on top of the meta, when we do see Purple Luffy recently, generally it is running 9 cost Mom, which is the new adaptation people are making. I was 1 month early on that. I think one list that people are going to be really interested in is the Buggy list, which is why I'm going to be going over that first. Now, unfortunately, the Buggy did not upload his list, but as we saw him on the stream, I was able to kind of at least figure out what cards are in his deck and then try to piece together as best as I could. Obviously, this is probably wrong, but it is a 50 that would make sense and runs all of the cards that he was running in the championship. Don't worry, for all of the other lists in this video, we do have the actual players list. It's just this one, the only Buggy player did not upload their list. But he did upload his match history. As we can see, he actually beat every single deck that he hit except for Teach. He hit Teach twice and lost twice, which is interesting because I thought that the Teach matchup would be favored for Buggy due to the fact that you can play 10 cost Buggy off of your leader effect when your on-play effects are being locked by Teach, but perhaps there's something that I'm not really understanding about this matchup, and it's maybe something that I should try out more. One thing to point out about this list for people who really want to play Buggy in OP09 is that actually 3 of the cards in this list are not in OP09. They are promo cards. The 4-cost Mihawk, who allows you to play a 5-cost if once the condition is met, is very good when you're going second on your Fordong turn, as you can eventually hit and then also use the effect to be able to play a 5-cost that allows you to get closer to meeting the condition for 10-cost Buggy. The 5-cost Crocodile is a 5-cost 7,000 power character, which is honestly very strong on its own, but has the on-play effect to get rid of characters that have 2,000 power or less. This is especially good into decks such as Doflamingo, of course, because the 1-cost searchers act as fuel for the 1-cost Law, and if you can deny them the ability to get these cards back to their hand for counter, then it just makes the game a lot more difficult for them. Not only this, but it also gets rid of the blockers from Bonney, so it is a very solid card in general.
Lastly, the 7 cost Buggy is the most important character to the deck currently, because the Doflamingo matchup, which before this card was introduced was very losing, is suddenly basically unlosable. This Floodgate Buggy does not let the opponent's 3 or 4 cost characters attack, and in return he cannot attack either. However, as he also establishes a 6 cost on his on-play effect, he can play the 6 cost Mihawk, not only getting him closer to his 10 cost Buggy, of course, but also just denying Doflamingo the ability to play the game. There are versions of this list that do not run the 4-cost Mihawk or the 5-cost Crocodile, but every version right now will run the 7-cost Buggy, so perhaps you may need to wait for this card to come out if you want to play Buggy.
Maybe now that it has done so well in this championship, ending in the top 4 position, we might see more Buggy next week. However, moving on to the champion, we have Lucci. People roll their eyes seeing that Lucci won a championship, but as you can see actually in its top 16 matches, he fought Black Yellow Luffy in the top 16 match, and Teach in the finals. Both of these matchups are considered to be extremely difficult for the Lucci, but he was able to overcome them. Now, obviously, we were able to see the championship finals, and in the finals, he won thanks to 9-cost Kaido. Because Kaido's activate main, it does not have an on-play effect, meaning that even when Teach uses his effects to negate your on-play effects, you can still, for example, as he did on stream, use Tempest Kick and 9-cost Kaido to be able to clear 10-cost Teach. I presume that this is probably how he beat the Black Yellow Luffy player as well, as, of course, Kaido not only is activate main, but also trashes the character, meaning that he can trash 8-cost Moria even with the protection of the 5-cost Subble. Obviously, we didn't see this top 16 match, but we saw how he won the finals, and without this 9-cost Kaido, he would 100% lose. Because of this one tech card that he ran, he was able to overcome this matchup and become the champion, so that is definitely the key card here. The second place list, and another deck that I'm sure many people are excited for, is Teach. I'm going to put out a Teach video soon. I think that this is a very good list. However, this wasn't the only Teach in the top 16. As you remember, there were 2 Teaches, and I have both lists actually. This was the Teach list that came up in the runner-up position, and you can see that he's running 7-cost Jack. There was rumors about if 7-cost Jack is better, 9-cost Kaido perhaps, or even things such as Manshiri or the 3-cost Bartolomeo, but in the end it seems like we've come full circle and people are back on Jack. In fact, the Teach list that came second place and the Teach list that came in the top 8 actually only have 2 cards different. The top 8 Teach list only runs 1 stage and 2 Tempest Kick, whereas the runner-up list just runs 3 stage. Other than this, the list is identical between the two, and as such, it's pretty clear to say now that maybe this is the correct version of Teach that people should be running, because although the runner-up did not post his match history, the person who got top 8 did. The top 8 Teach hit Doflamingo 4 times. 3 times in preliminary rounds. In the preliminary rounds, he went 2-1 against Doflamingo, and then he ended up losing to Doflamingo in the top 8 match, which is where his run ended. Nonetheless, over his entire game day, he went 2-2 against Doflamingos, and these aren't just random first-round Doflamingos. His first Doflamingo was from round 6. These are very good Doflamingo players that he was beating. Not only this, but he made a tweet that he thinks that the current version of Doflamingo, only running Perfume Femur, actually loses to Teach. We'll definitely need to keep an eye on that, because if that's true, that is very scary for the meta. Hey, I see you. Are you part of the 70% that's not subscribed? Maybe you should change that. I'm sorry. But if you can subscribe, that'd be great. Next up, we have Shanks. Shanks was on the feature match on the stream at the top 8 match, and actually lost in a very unfortunate way. If he had 1000 counter to be able to survive the attack, then he may have been able to finish out the game with the 10-cost Goldie Roger the next turn. However, as he didn't have enough counter in his deck, he ended up losing. Shanks actually has this thing very often where he has too many cards without counter in his hand, and so at the time it seemed quite understandable that this is how he would lose, but actually looking at his list now, he runs 4 of the 5-cost Rayleigh and 3 0-cost events. People generally don't tend to run these events just because they don't have the space to, but the fact that he ran these cards to be able to compensate for the situation where he didn't have enough counter and still ended up not having a counter does kind of show some of the weaknesses of Shanks, but of course, as he ended up getting top 8, it is definitely worth talking about. One important thing actually is that he doesn't run the 7-cost Newgate. I think basically every single Shanks list automatically runs at least 3 or 4 of the 7-cost Newgate. However, this list that got into the top 8 does not run any. Instead, he's of course running these events or the 5-cost Rayleigh and maximizing his 10 costs. He runs 6 10-cost rushers in the 4 10-cost Shankses and the 2 Rogers. He also runs the 10 cost KO Shanks, which is a meta call based on sort of decks that he might be expecting to hit. A lot of the ratios of these 10 costs is more down to what you think you're going to hit in the meta rather than a certain correct template for Shanks. As such, this can definitely change with time, but people don't generally run 2 Rogers, so by running 2, he's definitely expecting to try to get to it at some point in the game. When people don't expect how you're going to play and put you down to 0 life and you suddenly slam Roger, he can flip the game very immediately. Shanks, I think, has a very solid matchup into a lot of the meta, except that he has a slightly bad Lucci matchup. He does very well actually into Black Luffy, and depending on how the Doflamingo player plays or draws, he can do quite well into Doflamingo as well. As such, I was honestly expecting a little bit more Shanks, especially given his play rate, but it might be that people aren't really deciding on what top end to run, or if they should or shouldn't run events or the 5-cost Rayleigh. Next, the established king of the meta, Doflamingo. Doflamingo in this meta has generally sort of started to stabilize for the list that people tend to run, and this is through the Jozu, more bounce-oriented system that also runs the 2-cost Teach. Now that OP08.5 is out overseas, I've also seen this version be quite popular, and I hope that my guides, for example, have been able to help you if you are trying to learn this deck. Still, this is now the very standard version of the deck, and the one issue with this deck is that basically you want to run 4 of every single card, but if you do that, you end up having basically 52 cards every single time, so it's just a matter of what you end up cutting. In this situation, he ended up putting down his Jozu down to 3 and his Teach down to 3, which I think is understandable because you don't really need Jozu or Teach in the early game, you just need to draw into them late game. I think that what you end up cutting at the end is very much personal preference. Jozu, of course, is not very good into Lucci, so if you're expecting to hit Lucci and want to be as strong as possible in this matchup, then you definitely don't want to have Jozu in your hand. Another Doflamingo list that made it to the top cut and was actually the Doflamingo that was on stream in the top 16 match against Buggy is this. There's something missing, or something unusual about this deck. Can you see it? This guy is only running 3 of the 4-cost blocker Hancock. There have been some talks about if you actually need this because the turns that you play Hancock are very hard to play Teach, and as we can see, he's running 4 Teach and only 3 Hancock, so he might be prioritizing Teach as a move in the early game, but it is still extremely scary in my opinion because Hancock is just such a power card in so many situations. I personally don't see a world where I would ever reduce this below 4, but I really want to show this list because he did reduce it and he reached the top 16. Doflamingo is still going to be the most well-rounded deck because even if you are expecting to hit lots of Doflamingos, like this guy ended up doing, you just may not hit any. And in the event that you hit into lots of the random things in the meta, Doflamingo is just the one that'll fare the best into most of them in general. Although I think in these championship, Doflamingo is probably going to be the highest share in top cut, I don't necessarily think that he's going to win every time. I do think it's quite possible that he's going to end up winning maybe 2 or 3 times. But because of how flexible the meta is and how easy it is to come up with answers to certain things and just have a great run on the day, really, I think anything can win. Nonetheless, if you are unsure and you don't really like to switch your deck every 2 weeks with the meta changing, then definitely you want to be playing Doflamingo because he is a staple to the meta and many things have to adapt to him. But if you do enjoy switching your deck from time to time, there are many cool things such as Teach or Shanks or Bonney or Purple Luffy. Any of these decks really can win it on a good day. We have 2 more decks to showcase, and the first one is going to be Black Luffy. Black Luffy, if you saw my 3v3 breakdown video, this list is actually extremely similar to the ones that won in that one as well. People in Japan are generally running Kuzan, but they are only running it at 2. In that space, they're running the 5-cost and 2-cost Ace. Now, many people may not like this tech, and I understand that, but there are certain matchups in OP09 where just having this extra rush can be quite important. In the Shanks matchup, for example, because of Shanks' lead ability, it's very easy for him to hold on and maintain to power in the early game to make enough time for him to play his 10-cost Shanks. As such, without any sort of extra pressure on the opponent's life through things like Ace, it becomes quite difficult. As such, that's the reason why people are running Ace, and you can also see that he's running the 3-cost Iwankofu to just be extra Hiyori in the Doflamingo matchup. Ice Age is perhaps for the Bonney matchup, and in general he's running a sort of well-rounded list to try to accommodate for anything that he may hit in the meta. The final and most bizarre deck is Enel. This Enel made it so I tried to record a serious analysis of this list, but like, what am I looking at? We have 3 Momonosuke. There are 7 targets for him. There's Hiyori and there's Orin. You can play Hiyori and put Orin in your life, and then put Hiyori into your life with the Momonosuke, but that's a very situational combo. The 3-cost Speeded makes sense because we don't have Red Purple anymore, so it is just a trigger blocker.
And not having the 2 cost Shidashi blocker is a bit weird, I guess. Okay, and wait, follow-up question. What matchup do you need Orin in? Maybe the Lucci matchup? But then is 7 Enel not better? People are running 7 Enel recently to deal with the Lucci matchup. Obviously, I'm not ragging on the deck or anything. I'm just really surprised because I actually played a lot of Enel back in the day. I just can't really wrap my head around this. I'm sorry. But nonetheless, it is a deck, and it did do very well in the tournament. It beat all of the Doflamingos that it hit in the preliminary rounds, eventually losing to Teach. Teach is notoriously a very hard matchup because all of Enel's top end is on play effects, but nonetheless, it did very well, only losing to Black Purple Luffy and beating every single other deck, which is fairly meta. So, although it's very tricky for me to understand this deck because I haven't actually ran the deck, it did in fact win. So if you are curious about Enel, this is the one Enel deck that I found that got into the top 16. Try it, I guess.
This brings us to the end of this video again. I'm going to be making another one of these next week, as there's going to be another championship next week, and hopefully once a week until the end of the championship season. It might be a lot, and maybe I'll decide to take some weeks off if it seems like too much content, but if you actually enjoy this kind of content, then of course let me know, and I will make it. I hope that you guys enjoyed it, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye.